Robert Henderson had always prided himself on knowing his family well. After 22 years of marriage to Sarah and raising 3 kids in their suburban Chicago home, he thought he had a handle on the rhythms of their household. Tuesday evenings were for homework and family dinner. Weekends meant soccer games for Emma, his youngest, and basketball practice for the twins, Jake and Lucas. It was a predictable life, and Robert liked it that way. That Tuesday started like any other. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing her famous meatloaf, while Robert helped Emma with her math homework at the dining table. The twins, both 17, were supposedly upstairs doing their senior year assignments. Lucas had been accepted to Northwestern for engineering, while Jake was still waiting to hear back from several colleges. They were good kids, Robert always told his colleagues. Never gave him real trouble. The first sign something was wrong came when Detective Morrison called around 8 that evening. Robert almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something made him pick up on the 4th ring. "Mr. Henderson? This is Detective Morrison with the Chicago Police Department. We need to speak with you about your son, Jake." Robert's stomach dropped. He could hear Sarah's voice from the kitchen, laughing at something Emma had said, completely unaware that their world was about to shift. He stepped outside onto the back porch, closing the door behind him. "What's this about, Detective?" "Your son was present during a raid we conducted this afternoon at a warehouse on the south side. We have reason to believe he's been involved in distributing stolen electronics. We need him to come in for questioning." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. Jake? His Jake, who helped elderly Mrs. Patterson with her groceries every Sunday, who volunteered at the animal shelter and made honor roll every semester. "There has to be some mistake," Robert said, his voice barely steady. "Jake wouldn't be involved in anything like that. I understand this is difficult, Mr. Henderson, but we have surveillance footage and witness statements. We'd like to handle this quietly, given his age and clean record. Can you bring him to the station tomorrow at 10? After the detective hung up, Robert stood on the porch for a long time, watching the neighbor's cat prowl through their garden. Inside, he could hear the familiar sounds of his family's evening routine. Sarah calling up the stairs for the boys to come down for dessert. Emma practicing piano in the living room. Lucas laughing at something on his phone. When he finally went back inside, Jake was setting plates around the table for Sarah's apple pie. His son looked so normal, so innocent, wearing his Blackhawks t-shirt and basketball shorts. His hair was still damp from a shower, and he was joking with Lucas about something that had happened at school. "Dad, you okay?" Jake asked, noticing Robert's expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Robert managed a weak smile. "Just tired, son. Long day at work." But as Jake turned back to help his mother serve dessert, Robert studied his face more carefully. Were those new expensive sneakers? And that watch Jake had been wearing lately, had Robert ever seen it before? Small details that suddenly seemed significant, though he couldn't be sure if his mind was playing tricks on him. During dessert, Robert found himself analyzing every word Jake said, every gesture. When Sarah mentioned that Jake had been staying out later lately, Jake's explanation about study groups at friends' houses seemed suddenly hollow. When Emma asked Jake about his weekend plans, there was a brief hesitation before he answered that Robert hadn't noticed before. After the kids went upstairs, Robert helped Sarah clean the dishes in silence. She chatted about her day at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in her husband's mind. How could he tell her? How could he explain that their son, the one she bragged about to her coworkers, might be in serious legal trouble? "Rob, you're washing that plate for the 3rd time," Sarah said, touching his arm gently. "What's going on?" He looked at his wife of 22 years, her kind brown eyes full of concern, and felt the weight of what he had to tell her. But not yet. Not until he knew more. Not until he could figure out how to protect his family from falling apart. "Just thinking about a problem at work," he lied, hating himself for it. "Nothing we can't handle." Later that night, Robert lay awake staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept peacefully beside him. Down the hall, he could hear Lucas playing video games with his headphones on, the faint sounds of gunfire and explosions drifting through the walls. Jake's room was silent. Around midnight, Robert heard footsteps in the hallway and the soft click of the front door opening and closing. He got up and peered through the bedroom window, watching as Jake walked quickly down the street toward the corner where a dark sedan was waiting. His son got into the passenger seat, and the car drove away into the night. Robert stood at the window until dawn, waiting for Jake to return. When his son finally slipped back into the house at 5:30 in the morning, Robert pretended to be asleep. But as he heard Jake's bedroom door close softly, he realized that everything he thought he knew about his family was about to change. The boy who had just snuck back into their house wasn't the same Jake who had served apple pie just hours earlier. Tomorrow, he would have to sit his son down and demand the truth. Tomorrow, he would have to tell Sarah that their carefully constructed suburban life had cracks running deeper than either of them had imagined. The next morning came too soon and not soon enough. Robert sat at the kitchen table with his coffee, watching Jake eat cereal like it was any other Wednesday. His son looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, but he was putting on a good show of normalcy. Sarah bustled around the kitchen, packing lunches and reminding Emma about her after-school piano lesson. "Jake, you're riding with Lucas this morning, right?" Sarah asked, not looking up from making sandwiches. "Actually, I can drive him," Robert said suddenly. Both Sarah and Jake looked at him with surprise. "Dad, I'm fine taking the bus," Jake said quickly. "Besides, don't you have that early meeting?" The meeting got moved. Robert kept his voice steady. "We need to talk anyway." Something in his father's tone made Jake stop eating. Lucas, who had just come downstairs with his backpack, picked up on the tension immediately. "Everything okay?" Lucas asked, looking between his father and twin brother. "Fine," Robert said. "Jake and I just have some things to discuss." Sarah paused in her lunch-making routine, sensing the undercurrent in the room. "Rob, is everything all right?" Before Robert could answer, his phone rang. It was his office, and he had to take it. While he stepped into the next room, he heard Sarah asking Jake if he was in some kind of trouble. Jake's response was too quiet to hear, but when Robert returned, both Sarah and Lucas were staring at Jake with concerned expressions. "Lucas, take the bus today," Robert said. "Jake, get your things. We're leaving now." The drive to school was silent for the first few blocks. Jake stared out the passenger window, his jaw clenched tight. Robert could see his son's reflection in the glass, and for a moment, Jake looked much older than 17. "Detective Morrison called last night," Robert said finally. Jake's entire body went rigid. He slowly turned to look at his father, and Robert saw something he'd never seen in his son's eyes before: genuine fear. "Dad, I can explain, can you?" Robert pulled into the parking lot of Lincoln Park, about halfway to Jake's school. He put the car in park and turned to face his son fully. "Because right now, I'm trying to understand how my son ended up in a police raid involving stolen electronics." Jake's face went pale. His hands were trembling slightly as he ran them through his hair. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is, Jake. Because I've been awake all night trying to figure out where I went wrong as your father." The pain in Robert's voice seemed to hit Jake harder than anger would have. His son's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to crawl into Robert's lap after a nightmare. "I needed money," Jake said quietly. "For college. I know you and Mom are already stretching things with both Lucas and me going to school. I heard you talking about taking out a second mortgage." Robert felt his heart clench. "So you decided to turn to crime?" "It wasn't supposed to be crime," Jake said desperately. "This guy Marcus at school, he said he had connections with people who bought electronics. He said they were overstock items, perfectly legal. I thought I was just helping move inventory." "Jake, you're 17 years old. Did it never occur to you to ask me for help instead of trusting some kid at school? You already work 2 jobs, Dad. Mom's pulling double shifts at the hospital. Emma needs new soccer cleats and piano lessons. I see how tired you both are." Jake's voice cracked. "I just wanted to help, not make things worse." Robert stared at his son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in months. Jake had always been the more sensitive of the twins, the one who worried about everyone else's problems. But somewhere along the way, that sensitivity had turned into a burden that Jake felt he had to carry alone. "How long has this been going on?" 3 months, Jake admitted. "Maybe 4. At first, it was just small stuff. Phone cases, chargers, things like that. Marcus said his contact needed more help, and the money was really good. I was saving everything for college." "Where's the money now?" Jake reached into his backpack and pulled out a thick envelope. "Most of it's here. I was going to give it to you and Mom for Christmas, tell you I got a job or something." Robert took the envelope, his hands shaking slightly. There had to be at least $3,000 inside. "Jake, this is evidence. You could go to prison." "I know." Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, I'm scared." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching joggers pass by on the park's trails. Robert thought about all the conversations he'd had with his son over the years about right and wrong, about making good choices, about coming to him with problems. Somehow, despite all of that, Jake had still felt so alone that he'd turned to crime. "We have to tell your mother," Robert said finally. Jake nodded miserably. "She's going to hate me." "No, son. She's going to be disappointed and scared, just like I am. But she won't hate you. We don't hate you." Robert put his hand on Jake's shoulder. "We're going to figure this out together. What about the police? We're going to the station this morning. You're going to tell Detective Morrison everything you told me, and you're going to cooperate completely. You're going to face the consequences of your choices, but you're not going to face them alone." Jake nodded again, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry. I know you are. And I'm sorry too, Jake. I'm sorry that you felt like you couldn't come to me. I'm sorry that you felt like our financial problems were your responsibility to solve." Robert called Jake's school to excuse his absence, then called his own office to cancel his meetings. When they pulled into their driveway at home, Sarah's car was already gone. She'd left for her shift at the hospital. Emma was at school. It was just the two of them and Lucas, who was supposed to be at school, but whose car was still in the driveway. They found Lucas sitting at the kitchen table, clearly waiting for them. "I skipped first period," Lucas said before either of them could speak. "I knew something was really wrong, and I couldn't just go to chemistry class and pretend everything was normal." Jake looked at his twin brother, and Robert saw the communication that passed between them, the wordless understanding that twins seemed to share. "How much trouble are you in?" Lucas asked quietly. "A lot," Jake said. "Maybe prison-level trouble." Lucas absorbed this information with a maturity that reminded Robert that his sons weren't children anymore. They were young men facing adult consequences for adult decisions. "What do we do now?" Lucas asked, looking at his father. Robert looked at both of his sons, one who had made a terrible mistake and one who was ready to stand by his brother no matter what, and felt both proud and heartbroken at the same time. "Now we call your mother," Robert said, "and then we go face this together as a family." Calling Sarah at the hospital was one of the hardest things Robert had ever had to do. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and professional. "Henderson." "Sarah, it's me. I need you to come home." The change in her tone was immediate. "What's wrong? Is someone hurt?" "No one's hurt, but we have a family emergency. Jake is in legal trouble, and we need to deal with it today." There was silence on the other end for so long that Robert thought the call might have dropped. Finally, Sarah's voice came back, smaller and strained. "How serious?" "Serious enough that we have to go to the police station this morning. I'll be home in 20 minutes. When Sarah walked through the front door, still wearing her hospital scrubs, the look on her face nearly broke Robert's heart. She'd been crying during the drive home. Her eyes were red and her normally perfect hair was disheveled. She looked at Jake sitting at the kitchen table and seemed to see everything at once. The fear, the guilt, the shame. Instead of the anger Robert had expected, Sarah walked straight to Jake and wrapped him in her arms. "Whatever you've done, we'll figure it out," she whispered into his hair. "But you have to tell me everything." Jake broke down then, sobbing against his mother's shoulder while she held him like he was still a little boy. Lucas sat quietly at the table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, and Robert felt the weight of how this was affecting all of them. When Jake composed himself enough to speak, he told Sarah the same story he'd told Robert. She listened without interrupting, her face cycling through disbelief, disappointment, and heartbreak. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. $3,000, she said finally, looking at the envelope on the table. "Jake, do you understand that this makes you look like more than just a kid who made a mistake? This makes you look like a criminal." "I know," Jake whispered. Sarah looked at Robert. "What did the detective say exactly?" Robert explained the conversation, and Sarah's face grew paler with each detail. She was a smart woman. She understood the implications as clearly as he did. "We need a lawyer," she said. "Before we go to the police station, we need legal representation." "Mom, we can't afford a lawyer," Jake protested. "That's the whole reason I got into this mess." "We'll figure out the money," Sarah said firmly. "Robert, call that attorney who handled our house closing. See if he does criminal law or can recommend someone." While Robert made phone calls, Sarah sent Lucas to school with instructions to pick up Emma from her after-school program and keep her occupied until they got home. She didn't want their youngest daughter to see the family in crisis mode until they knew more about what they were dealing with. The lawyer, Dan Martinez, couldn't meet with them immediately but agreed to a phone consultation. He was blunt about Jake's situation. If they have surveillance footage and witnesses, your son is looking at serious charges. Best case scenario, given his age and clean record, he might get probation and community service. Worst case, he could face juvenile detention. What should we do at the police station? Robert asked. Be honest, be cooperative, but don't let Jake answer any questions without me present. I'll meet you there in an hour. The police station was nothing like what any of them had expected. Detective Morrison was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She treated Jake with respect, but made it clear that his situation was serious. We've been tracking this operation for 6 months, she explained to the family. Your son was what we call a runner, someone who transported stolen goods from warehouses to buyers. The electronics were taken from shipping containers at O'Hare Airport. Sarah gripped Robert's hand tightly. Airport theft was federal, which meant this could be even worse than they'd thought. When the lawyer arrived, he spent 30 minutes talking privately with Jake before the formal questioning began. Jake answered every question honestly, providing names, dates, and details about his involvement. He handed over the envelope of money and his phone, which contained text messages coordinating pickups and deliveries. Your son's cooperation is noted, Detective Morrison said afterward. The district attorney will take that into consideration when deciding on charges. Because Jake is 17, this will likely be handled in juvenile court, but given the federal nature of the theft, there could be additional charges. What happens now? Sarah asked. Jake will be released to your custody pending formal charges. He'll need to appear in court next week for an initial hearing. I recommend you keep him close to home and away from anyone involved in this case. On the drive home, the family was quiet except for Jake's occasional apologies. Robert felt like he was driving through a nightmare. Everything familiar, but somehow changed. Their neighborhood looked the same, but their house now felt like a place where secrets had been kept and trust had been broken. Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table when they walked in, chatting with Lucas about her day at school. She looked up expectantly, clearly sensing that something important had happened. Family meeting, Sarah said gently. Living room. They gathered on the couches, Emma looking confused and worried. Robert and Sarah had agreed in the car that they would tell her the truth, but in terms a 13-year-old could understand. Jake made some serious mistakes, Sarah began. He got involved with some people who were doing illegal things, and now he has to face the consequences. Emma's eyes widened. Like what kind of illegal things? Selling stolen property, Jake said quietly. I thought I was helping with legitimate business, but I was wrong. Really, really wrong. Are you going to jail? Emma asked, her voice small. I don't know yet, Jake admitted. Maybe. Emma started to cry then, and Lucas moved to sit next to her on the couch, putting his arm around her shoulders. Robert watched his family, really looked at them, and saw how Jake's choices had affected everyone. Emma was scared and confused. Lucas was trying to be strong for everyone else while dealing with his own fear about his twin brother. Sarah was exhausted and heartbroken, and Jake was carrying the weight of knowing he'd brought all of this pain to the people he loved most. What do we do now? Emma asked through her tears. We stick together, Robert said. We face whatever comes next as a family. Jake made a mistake, but he's still our son and your brother. We're going to help him through this, and we're going to learn from it. I'm going to get a job, Jake said suddenly. A real job. I want to pay back that money, and I want to help with lawyer fees. First, you're going to focus on school and staying out of trouble, Sarah said. Then we'll talk about jobs. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed and Lucas was doing homework, Robert found Jake sitting on the back porch steps, staring up at the stars. Can't sleep? Robert asked, sitting down beside his son. Every time I close my eyes, I see that warehouse and all those police officers, Jake said. I keep thinking about how stupid I was. You made a bad choice, but you're not stupid, Robert said. You were trying to solve a problem, but you went about it the wrong way. Do you think I'll go to jail? Robert was quiet for a moment. I don't know, but whatever happens, your mother and I will be there for you. This family doesn't give up on each other. Jake nodded, wiping his eyes. Dad, I'm going to make this right somehow. I don't know how yet, but I will. I believe you, Robert said. And despite everything that had happened, despite the uncertainty ahead, he meant it. His son had made a terrible mistake, but Jake was still the boy who helped elderly neighbors and volunteered at the animal shelter. This crisis didn't define him. How he handled it would. The juvenile courthouse in downtown Chicago was nothing like the courtrooms Robert had seen on television. The hallways were crowded with families that looked just like his, parents trying to hold themselves together while their teenagers faced adult consequences for bad decisions. Sarah sat between Robert and Jake on a wooden bench outside courtroom B, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Jake wore the navy suit they'd bought him for Lucas's high school graduation last spring. It was slightly too big, making him look younger than his 17 years. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd shaved off the stubble he'd been growing. Dan Martinez, their lawyer, had insisted on the clean-cut appearance. "Remember what we talked about," Martinez said quietly to Jake. "Stand when the judge enters. Answer, yes, Your Honor, or no, Your Honor, and don't volunteer information beyond what you're asked." Lucas had wanted to come, but they decided it was better for him to stay home with Emma. Someone needed to maintain normalcy, and Lucas was handling that responsibility with a maturity that both impressed and worried Robert. His son shouldn't have to be the stable one at 17. When their case was called, they filed into the courtroom behind Martinez. Judge Patricia Chun was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She reviewed Jake's file while they stood at the defendant's table, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "Jacob Michael Henderson," she said finally. "You're charged with trafficking in stolen property and conspiracy to commit theft. How do you plead?" Jake's voice was barely audible. "Guilty, Your Honor." The prosecutor, a young man who looked fresh out of law school, presented the state's case efficiently. The evidence was overwhelming: surveillance footage, text messages, witness statements. Jake had been caught red-handed, and there was no point in fighting the charges. But when Martinez stood to speak for Jake, he painted a different picture. He talked about Jake's volunteer work, his academic achievements, his plan to study engineering at Northwestern. He presented letters from teachers, coaches, and Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor, who wrote about Jake's kindness and reliability. "Your Honor, this is a good kid who made a terrible mistake," Martinez said. "He wasn't motivated by greed or criminal intent. He was trying to help his family financially and fell in with the wrong crowd. He's cooperated fully with law enforcement and is genuinely remorseful for his actions." When Judge Chun asked Jake to speak, he stood slowly and cleared his throat. Robert held his breath. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt my family and disappointed everyone who believed in me. I thought I was helping, but I was just making everything worse." Jake's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I want to make this right somehow. I want to show people that this isn't who I really am." Judge Chun studied Jake for a long moment. "Mr. Henderson, you're facing serious charges that could result in juvenile detention. However, given your cooperation with law enforcement, your clean record, and the circumstances of your involvement, I'm willing to consider alternatives." She sentenced Jake to 18 months of probation, 300 hours of community service, and restitution of the full amount he'd earned from his criminal activities. He would also have to attend weekly counseling sessions and maintain perfect school attendance. "If you violate any terms of this probation, you will serve 6 months in juvenile detention," Judge Chun warned. "Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." Walking out of the courthouse, Robert felt like they'd dodged a bullet. But the relief was mixed with the realization that this was just the beginning. 18 months was a long time for a family to live under the shadow of Jake's mistake. The first challenge came that afternoon when Robert returned to work. His boss, Tom Sullivan, called him into his office and closed the door. "I heard about Jake," Tom said without preamble. "It's all over the neighborhood, Rob. My wife heard it at the grocery store." Robert's heart sank. In their close-knit suburb, news traveled fast. "Tom, I hope this won't affect my position here. Jake's situation has nothing to do with my work." "I'm not worried about your work," Tom said. "But I am worried about you. You look like hell, and I know this has to be eating you alive." The conversation was awkward but supportive. Tom offered Robert flexible hours to deal with Jake's court dates and counseling appointments. But Robert knew that not everyone would be as understanding. That evening, Sarah came home from the hospital looking defeated. She'd endured whispered conversations and pointed looks all day. 2 colleagues had made comments about kids these days within her hearing, and she wasn't sure if they knew about Jake or if it was just unfortunate timing. "Maybe we should consider moving," she said over dinner. "Start fresh somewhere else." "We're not running away," Robert said firmly. This is our home. These are our friends and neighbors. If they can't see past one mistake to who Jake really is, that's their problem. Emma had been quiet during dinner, pushing her food around her plate. Finally, she spoke up. Some kids at school are saying stuff about Jake. Robert and Sarah exchanged looks. They'd known this was coming, but it still hurt to see their youngest dealing with the fallout. What kind of stuff? Sarah asked gently. That he's a criminal. That our whole family is probably criminals. Emma's voice was small and hurt. Madison Shin said her mom told her not to hang out with me anymore because we're bad influences. Jake put down his fork and looked stricken. I'm so sorry. I never thought about how this would affect you. It's not your fault that people are stupid, Emma said with surprising maturity. But it still hurts. Later that night, Robert found Jake in his room doing homework. His son's desk was covered with college brochures and scholarship applications, all for schools other than Northwestern. Having second thoughts about Northwestern, Robert asked. Jake looked up with tired eyes. They can rescind my acceptance because of the criminal charges. Mr. Martinez said most colleges have morality clauses. I'm looking at community college options now. Robert sat on Jake's bed, feeling the weight of how completely his son's life had changed. Jake, we'll figure something out. Maybe Northwestern will understand the circumstances. Dad, I appreciate the optimism, but I have to be realistic. I messed up my future when I decided to trust Marcus instead of trusting you and Mom. The next morning brought another challenge. Lucas came down to breakfast looking upset. Coach Williams wants to see me after practice today, he said. Some parents are saying I might be involved in Jake's stuff, and they don't want their kids on the team with me. Sarah slammed her coffee mug down on the counter. That's ridiculous. You had nothing to do with this. But I'm Jake's twin, Lucas said. People figure if one of us is crooked, maybe both of us are. Robert felt anger rising in his chest. It was one thing for people to judge Jake. He had made his choices and had to face the consequences. But dragging Lucas and Emma into it was unfair and cruel. I'll call Coach Williams myself, Robert said. This stops now. Dad, no, Lucas said quickly. That'll just make it worse. Let me handle it. I can prove to them that I'm not Jake. The pain in Lucas's voice, the way he distanced himself from his twin brother, was heartbreaking. Robert could see the family fracturing under the pressure, each member trying to cope with the shame and judgment in their own way. That evening, Jake announced that he'd gotten a job at the local grocery store stocking shelves on weekends and after school. It's not much, but it's honest work, he said. I want to start paying you back for the lawyer fees. As Robert watched his son trying to rebuild his life one honest dollar at a time, he felt proud and heartbroken simultaneously. The boy was showing real character in how he handled his consequences, but the cost to the entire family was becoming clearer every day. 3 months into Jake's probation, the Henderson family had settled into a new routine that revolved around court dates, community service, and careful navigation of their social circles. Jake's schedule was rigid: school, work at Miller's Grocery, community service at the food bank, and counseling sessions with Dr. Rebecca Foster every Thursday evening. The counseling sessions had been court-mandated, but Jake had surprised everyone by actually engaging with the process. Dr. Foster was a woman in her 50s who specialized in adolescent behavioral issues, and she had a way of asking questions that made Jake think about his choices without making him feel judged. She says I have something called hyper-responsibility, Jake told his family one evening after a session. Like, I feel responsible for fixing everyone else's problems, even when they're not really my problems to fix. Sarah looked up from the bills she was sorting at the kitchen table. That sounds familiar. Dr. Foster thinks that's why I got involved with Marcus. She says I saw Mom and Dad working so hard and stressed about money, and I decided it was my job to fix it instead of just being a kid and focusing on school. Robert, who was helping Emma with her science project, paused in his explanation of photosynthesis. Jake, you know we never asked you to worry about our finances, right? I know, but I heard you guys talking late at night sometimes. About the mortgage, about college costs, about Mom's student loans. I thought if I could just make some quick money, I could help. Lucas, who had been quietly doing homework at the counter, finally spoke up. I heard those conversations too, but I never thought about getting involved in anything illegal. It was the first direct criticism Lucas had made of Jake's choices, and the room went quiet. The twins had been walking on eggshells around each other since the arrest, their usual easy relationship strained by the circumstances. You're right. Jake said after a moment. You made better choices than I did. You trusted Mom and Dad to handle their own problems. I'm not trying to make you feel worse, Lucas said, his voice softer. I just don't understand how we could hear the same things and react so differently. Dr. Foster had actually addressed this in a family session they'd all attended the week before. She'd explained that even identical twins could have completely different responses to stress and family dynamics. Jake was the one who tried to fix things, while Lucas was more likely to trust that adults would handle adult problems. The family sessions had been awkward but helpful. Emma had finally been able to express how scared she was that Jake might go to jail, and how embarrassed she felt when kids at school made comments. Sarah had talked about feeling like she'd failed as a mother, wondering what signs she'd missed. Robert had admitted that he felt guilty for working so much that Jake felt he couldn't come to him with concerns. But the sessions had also shown them their strengths. When Dr. Foster asked each family member to describe the others, the love and support came through clearly. Emma said Jake was the brother who taught her to ride a bike and always remembered her birthday. Lucas talked about how Jake had stayed up all night helping him with chemistry homework when he was struggling. Sarah and Robert both spoke about Jake's kindness and integrity, qualities that hadn't disappeared despite his poor judgment. The community service at the food bank had become surprisingly meaningful for Jake. He worked alongside other people who were trying to rebuild their lives, some dealing with addiction, others with criminal records, still others simply facing hard times. Mrs. Rodriguez, who managed the volunteer program, had taken a special interest in Jake. That boy has a good heart, she told Sarah when she stopped by to check on Jake's progress. He doesn't just do his required hours and leave. He stays to help with the heavy lifting, and he's patient with the elderly clients who take longer to choose their groceries. Jake had also started tutoring younger kids at the community center as part of his service hours. Working with children who were struggling in school seemed to give him a sense of purpose that had been missing before his arrest. At Miller's Grocery, Jake had earned the respect of his manager, Tom Miller, by showing up early, staying late when needed, and never complaining about the tedious work of stocking shelves and cleaning floors. Tom had even offered Jake additional hours during the summer. Your boy's got character, Tom told Robert one evening when they ran into each other at the store. He works harder than kids who've never been in trouble. Whatever you and Sarah are doing at home, it's working. The comment meant more to Robert than Tom probably realized. In the midst of all the judgment and whispered conversations, it was good to hear someone acknowledge that Jake was more than his worst mistake. At school, things had been more complicated. Some teachers had been supportive, understanding that Jake was working to make amends. Others seemed to watch him more closely, as if expecting him to cause trouble. His guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, not to be confused with their elderly neighbor, had been working with Jake to explore college options that might still be available despite his criminal record. Community college for 2 years, then transfer to a 4-year school, she'd suggested. Your grades are still strong, and your community service work shows you're serious about turning things around. Some admissions officers actually like to see students who've overcome adversity. Northwestern had indeed rescinded Jake's acceptance, as expected. The letter had been polite but firm. They couldn't admit students with recent criminal convictions. Jake had handled it better than Robert had expected, though he'd seen his son crying quietly in his room that night. Lucas had received his acceptance letter to Northwestern the same week Jake's was rescinded. He'd shown it to his parents privately, away from Jake, and hadn't celebrated the way he might have under different circumstances. I feel guilty being excited about college when Jake's future is so uncertain, Lucas had confided to his parents. Jake wants you to succeed, Sarah had assured him. Your success doesn't diminish his worth or his possibilities. But Robert could see the strain on Lucas. His son was dealing with his own social pressures at school, where some students and parents still viewed him with suspicion because of his association with Jake. The basketball team dynamics had been particularly challenging. Coach Williams had ultimately supported Lucas, but some parents had made their displeasure known. During a game against their crosstown rivals, Robert had overheard 2 fathers discussing whether Lucas could be trusted not to corrupt their sons. It's genetic, one had said. Bad character runs in families. Robert had wanted to confront them, but Sarah had held him back. Fighting them won't help Lucas, she'd said. Let his actions speak for themselves. Emma had found her own way to cope with the family crisis. She'd become fiercely protective of Jake, shutting down any negative comments about him at school with a sharp tongue that surprised everyone. When her former friend Madison Chun had made a snide comment about criminal families, Emma had responded by asking Madison if she'd ever made a mistake she regretted. "Jake made a mistake, but he's fixing it," Emma had said. "He's doing community service and working and trying to make things right. What are you doing to make the world better?" The comment had gotten back to Sarah through the school's parent network, and she'd felt proud of Emma's loyalty even while worrying about her youngest daughter's anger. One evening in early spring, the family was sitting on their back porch enjoying the warmer weather when Jake brought up something that had been on his mind. "I want to talk to other kids about what I went through," he said. "Dr. Foster thinks it might be helpful for me, and maybe I could keep other kids from making the same mistakes." "Like speaking at schools?" Robert asked. "Maybe. Or at community centers, youth groups, places like that. I keep thinking about how I felt so alone with the money problems and how I didn't know who to trust when Marcus approached me. If I could help other kids recognize the warning signs or give them someone to talk to who's been through it." Sarah looked at her son with admiration. "That's a wonderful idea, Jake. But are you ready for that kind of exposure? People will know your story." "People already know my story," Jake said with a slight smile. "At least this way, maybe something good can come from it." Robert realized that somewhere in the past 3 months, his son had grown up in ways that went beyond just facing legal consequences. Jake was thinking about how to use his experience to help others, which showed a maturity and sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. "We'll support whatever you decide to do," Robert said. "You've already shown tremendous character in how you've handled this situation." As they sat in the gathering dusk, Robert looked around at his family and felt something he hadn't expected: hope. They'd been through the worst of it, and they were still together, still supporting each other, still finding ways to grow from their struggles. Jake's mistake had nearly broken them, but it had also shown them how strong they could be when they faced challenges together. The auditorium at Lincoln High School was packed with teenagers, parents, and community members on a warm evening in late May. Jake stood backstage, adjusting his tie and trying to calm his nerves. In 6 months, he would complete his probation. Tonight, he was giving his first public speech about his experience with crime and consequences. Dr. Foster stood beside him, offering quiet encouragement. "Remember, you're not here to be perfect. You're here to be honest. That's what will connect with them." Through a gap in the curtain, Jake could see his family in the third row. Sarah sat between Robert and Emma, while Lucas had chosen to sit with some friends from the basketball team. The sight of them there, supporting him despite everything, gave Jake the courage he needed. Principal Martinez introduced him simply. "Jake Henderson is a senior at Lincoln High. He's here tonight to share his story with you, and I hope you'll listen with open hearts and minds." Jake walked to the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, and began. 8 months ago, I made the worst decision of my life. I got involved with people who were stealing electronics, and I helped them sell those stolen goods. I told myself I was doing it for good reasons, to help my family with money problems. But the truth is, I was scared to ask for help, and I was too proud to admit we were struggling. The auditorium was completely quiet. Jake could see some parents shifting uncomfortably, probably remembering their own financial worries and wondering what their kids might do in similar circumstances. He talked about the arrest, the shame of disappointing his family, and the ripple effects his choices had on everyone he loved. He spoke about his brother dealing with suspicion from teammates, his little sister facing questions at school, and his parents working extra hours to pay for legal fees. "The hardest part wasn't the community service or the probation or even losing my college acceptance," Jake continued. "The hardest part was seeing how my choices hurt people who had nothing to do with what I did. My family didn't deserve to suffer for my mistakes." When he opened the floor for questions, a sophomore named Maria raised her hand. "How do you live with the guilt?" Jake thought for a moment. "You don't get over it. You learn to carry it and use it to make better decisions. Every time I'm tempted to take a shortcut or make an excuse, I remember how it felt to watch my dad cry when he found out what I'd done. That keeps me honest." An adult in the back asked about college prospects. Jake was honest about the challenges, but also talked about the opportunities he'd discovered through community service and his job. "I'm starting at the community college in the fall, studying social work," he said. "I want to work with kids who are facing the same kinds of pressures I faced. My path to helping people just looks different than I originally planned." After the formal presentation, several teenagers approached Jake privately. A junior named Marcus, ironically sharing the name of Jake's former accomplice, talked about his family's financial struggles and admitted he'd been considering some easy money opportunities. "I kept thinking about what you said," Marcus told Jake, "about being too scared and proud to ask for help. I think I need to talk to my parents instead of trying to fix everything myself." A girl named Stephanie shared that her older brother had been arrested for drug dealing the previous year, and she'd been dealing with the same kind of social stigma that Emma had faced. "It helps to know we're not the only family going through this," she said. "Sometimes it feels like everyone else has their act together." These conversations continued for over an hour after the official event ended. Jake found himself exchanging contact information with several young people, promising to be available if they needed someone to talk to who understood their situations. On the drive home, the family was quiet at first, processing what they'd witnessed. "I'm proud of you," Emma said from the back seat. "You were brave up there." "More than brave," Lucas added. "You were real. That's harder than being brave." Robert caught Jake's eye in the rearview mirror. "How do you feel?" "Nervous but good," Jake replied. "Like maybe I can actually help people instead of just causing problems." Over the following weeks, Jake received several invitations to speak at other schools and community organizations. Word had spread about his presentation, and adults who worked with at-risk youth were interested in his perspective. Mrs. Rodriguez from the food bank had been in the audience that night, and she offered Jake a part-time position as a youth coordinator when his community service hours were completed. "You have a gift for connecting with young people," she told him, "and your experience gives you credibility that textbook training can't provide." The job offer came with a modest salary, but also the opportunity to develop programming for teenagers facing family crises. Jake would be able to continue his education while gaining practical experience in the field he wanted to pursue. Meanwhile, the family dynamics continued to evolve positively. Lucas had committed to Northwestern and was excited about starting in the fall, but he and Jake had also begun planning ways to stay connected despite the distance. They'd started a joint savings account to help with family expenses, both contributing from their part-time jobs. Emma had emerged from the crisis with increased maturity and empathy. She'd become involved in peer mediation at her middle school, helping other students work through conflicts. Sarah joked that having one child go through legal troubles had somehow produced 3 more thoughtful and responsible kids. The financial pressures that had originally motivated Jake's poor decisions had also improved, though not through any dramatic windfall. Robert had received a promotion at work, partly because his supervisors had been impressed with how he'd handled his family crisis without letting it affect his job performance. Sarah had completed a certification program that qualified her for higher-paying positions at the hospital. More importantly, they'd learned to communicate more openly about money and stress. The family now had regular meetings where they discussed both challenges and successes, ensuring that no one felt they had to carry burdens alone. On a Saturday morning in June, Jake was working at the grocery store when Tom Miller asked him to come to his office. "I've been thinking about expanding our community outreach program," Tom said. "We want to sponsor some local youth initiatives, and I'd like you to help identify worthwhile programs. It would mean additional hours and a small raise, but more importantly, it would let you use your experience to benefit other kids." Jake accepted immediately. The opportunity to combine his retail job with youth advocacy felt like another step toward building a meaningful career from the wreckage of his mistakes. That evening, the Henderson family gathered for their weekly dinner together, a tradition they'd established during the crisis and decided to maintain. As they shared updates about their week, Robert looked around the table and marveled at how much they'd all grown. Jake was becoming a young man with genuine purpose and direction. Lucas was preparing for college with excitement, but also with a deeper appreciation for family bonds. Emma had developed remarkable resilience and compassion. Sarah had found ways to balance her natural nurturing instincts with respect for her children's independence. "You know what I realized?" Sarah said as they were clearing dishes. "This whole experience taught us that we're stronger together than any of us are alone. Jake's mistake could have torn us apart, but instead it showed us how much we matter to each other." Jake paused in loading the dishwasher. "I still wish I'd never put you all through this." "We all wish that," Robert said. "But we can't change what happened. We can only control what we do next. And what we're doing next is pretty remarkable." 3 months later, Jake completed his probation successfully. Judge Chun commended him for not only meeting all requirements, but exceeding them through his volunteer work and community speaking. The criminal record would remain, but Jake had proven that it didn't define his future. At the completion ceremony, attended by his entire family, Jake thanked the judge for giving him the opportunity to make amends rather than simply serving time. "This experience taught me that mistakes don't have to be permanent," he said. "They can be the beginning of something better if you're willing to do the work to make them right." Walking out of the courthouse for the final time, Jake felt lighter than he had in over a year. The weight of his mistake would always be with him, but it no longer felt crushing. Instead, it felt like fuel for the work he wanted to do, helping other families navigate similar challenges. Robert drove the family to their favorite restaurant to celebrate Jake's completion of probation. As they sat around the table, laughing and sharing stories, he realized that his son's worst mistake had ultimately brought out the best in all of them. They'd learned to communicate better, support each other more effectively, and face challenges with honesty rather than fear. Jake raised his water glass in a toast to second chances and families that don't give up on each other. They all raised their glasses, and Robert felt grateful for the hard-won wisdom that had emerged from their darkest months. His family was stronger now, not despite what they'd been through, but because of it.